Devil, my friend. Fashion. Things to wear. Possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rockin' Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rockin' Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out. Fangs and Infernos. Let's bring all of you back to a time long ago where we talked about movies that had movies about them, that the devil, as well as your beloved vampire, fancy a little bit more than their original counterparts. Devil, my friend, let's revisit remakes that we think are better than the originals.
Yeah, it's I know we've talked about it before, and we're gonna bring back this sore subject for some people because
Suck
some
it up,
people
Buttercup.
some people don't like or don't believe that sequels can be better than their originals. And yes, I agree on 99.9% of the time. But yeah, there are some definitely that we believe is better. Like I said, even when we talk about this, even when we talk about any of the movies, whether or not we're talking about sequels, even movies that we talk about here when we do the showdowns and stuff like that, it's definitely opinionated. You know what I mean? To me, we've talked about it before, but the great, movies that are considered the mega of all movies, like Rocky Horror Picture Show and Lost Boys and stuff like that. Some people may not agree and think that those movies are lame and totally horrible.
They're
You're
allowed
wrong.
to be, they're allowed to be wrong.
No, they're allowed to be wrong, but that's beside the point. You know what I mean? You're allowed to have your opinion, and that's kind of like what we do when we do these remakes. You know what I mean? We're gonna talk about some movies that we love and some ones we've talked about before. We're gonna go into the Hills Have Eyes, which we've talked about the original,
Yep.
Wes Craven when we did our Wes Craven one. And, we're not saying anything bad about Wes Craven and or the Hills Have Eyes. We're just saying we believe that this was a little better of a remake. It's a little bit more of a newer telling. And then we're gonna talk about some Rats, some
Absolutely.
Willard, some Crispin Glover. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of the original Willard. I was a huge fan of the sequel, Ben, that came out. But I've always been a fan of Crispin Glover's Willard. I've always been a fan of this one. I always thought that this was a better remake. So, so if you don't like those two choices, well, I mean, you're going to be in for a long time. And the people who do enjoy or want to at least hear us rant and rave on why we think these are better remakes, you better strap in because it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Absolutely, for sure. And don't get me wrong, Devil. Like, I loved your pick in Willard. I really did, because Crispin Glover is Crispin Glover. I mean, he's so fun. Like, he is very much so. Like, before we get into things, a little bit of, like, just for the sake of context, like, Devil can attest to this. I am a very big fan of Nicholas Hoult. I've become an incredibly big supporter of his work. I think that as a character actor, the stuff that he does, I still feel is very underappreciated, but I do think it's getting to a level where people understand his skill set. So when you look at something like Nux in Mad Max, you look at something like Renfield, you look at something like the new Nosferatu. I genuinely have become quite a big fan of Nicholas Hoult. I think he's excellent in what he does. And that's the one thing that I've always loved about Crispin Glover, just like yourself, my friend. Like, he's got that knack of character actor, just expertise. Like, the guy gets it. And that's what I really love about him in particular. And to make it speedy, you've got, of course, Willard, which we're about to discuss. We've got, Back to the Future, which is what kind of got him going. And then you take something kind of obscure, just kind of in the middle, where you've got something like Charlie's Angels, where he played the creepy thin man. And again, of course, Fangs and Infernos. Look, Crispin has an amazing filmography, huge catalog of stuff he's known for. I just chose those three specifics. One, because it's relevant to right now. One, because it's kind of his debut to a certain degree. And one that's just kind of unique in the middle that kind of like people just kind of are familiar with as him playing that character. But that being said, I think that was an awesome thing. Same thing with The Hills Have Eyes when it comes to that movie. Like, it doesn't specify, it's not specific to a character like Willard will be when Devil and I get into it. But when it comes to this movie, it's based off Wes Craven. Of course, you guys know that from our episode. We talked in depth about not only The Hills Have Eyes, but we also brushed over The Hills Have Eyes Part 2. And this remake also has a Hills Have Eyes Part 2. We're not going to get into that. Don't really need to go there. That is irrelevant because Devil and I are going to discuss right now Hills Have Eyes, the remake, versus Willard. When it comes to Hills Have Eyes, I've always actually considered this actually as a very high regard when it comes to better sequels. I actually enjoy this movie quite a bit. It's right up there for me with the Dawn of the Dead sequel, which I wouldn't put the Dawn of the Dead sequel as a better remake because I still enjoy the original OG from George of Dawn of the Dead. You and I went up to Perryopolis when we went up to Monroeville. It was very nostalgic. It felt very intimate. It was an amazing experience that you and I got to be in that mall for Dawn of the Dead. But I don't want to get off track when it comes to that. Anyway, when it comes to Hills Have Eyes, I absolutely do love the remake of this movie. I thought it was very well done. I like the design of it. It does have the benefit, of course, when it comes to a lot of remakes, of having some money behind it. It was a full on theatrical release, it had a really good look to it. I love the casting of it. I'm a big fan of CSI New York. So, like, I loved the fact that Sid in CSI New York was Lizard in Hills Have Eyes. So I had an attachment to that character. But Devil, when it comes to you and me, one of the other characters that you and I have a connection with is Market Basket, and loved the fact that one of our beloveds from Holliston was in this movie as well as, Miss Ortiz. We definitely love that. But overall, brother, I like the design of this movie. I think it's got a good design to it. I think it flows very, very well. I mean, it's brutal right from the start. And sorry, Fangs and Infernos, but the fact of the matter is Devil and I can't really talk about this properly without talking about certain things. But it's an incredibly brutal intro when it comes to like, sexual assault. It's a trigger warning. It's got rape to it. You know, Unfortunately, and Mrs. Vamp didn't watch this movie with me, but I know she's familiar with the movie. But there's animal brutality to this movie that she is, of course, not an advocator of, not like you and I are either. But this is a very, very brutal movie, pretty much right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, and the reason why I feel like this movie not only is the better remake, it's when a lot of times it's because of who does it. You know what I mean? And right off the bat, finding out that Alexandra Aja was going to do this film, high tension. I love high tension. We've talked about hot tension, before and stuff like that. We love that movie. It's so brutal, and like I said, you take a
Yes.
movie where like this movie, yeah, it's got that brutalness to it. There's just there's just no strings attached. I mean, it's just going crazy. You know what I mean? It's like just everything. Like I said, I'm not saying that the original wasn't brutal. I mean, there was a
No.
lot of like the scenes and the things that they did in that movie were super super crazy too. But just the craziness in this one. I mean, the fact that he's putting the gun right to the baby's face in this movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got obviously you have the dog that gets killed. The dog gets killed. In the original one too. But just the brutalness of him, just them shooting. To the woman. The the wife's freaking right in the head, shooting the mom right in the gut,
Yeah.
to the point where it's just like, and I love the fact that, it explains more of this one too, where it's got that backstory with with the fallout and the fallout from all the not almost said toxic waste, not toxic waste, that's Toxic Avenger, the nuclear fallout and stuff
Yeah.
like that with this, where it basically kind of do that. And I love that. I love the fact that it's mainly all like prosthetics and things like that. They did a little bit of weirdness with CGI, not really CGI, but like the girl that's in it, her eyes all jested up. They just kind of
Yeah.
warped it with some like, with some visual effects and stuff like that. But I love the fact that, Greg Nicotero did a lot of the film. He was actually one of the characters in this movie too. So I thought that was
Yep.
badass. But yeah, I just love what I mean, the dad, which, Buffalo Bill, you know what I mean? He apparently he didn't rub enough lotion on his skin because he got burnt the fuck up.
I
Just
know.
that scene alone with him just burning and on that freaking cross is just crazy. It's
Yeah.
just like I love that. I love the fact that even like I said, even in the original where you have, the same, you had the dogs, obviously Beauty and the Beast, were the names of the dogs in the original one, and you kind of had that.
Honestly, shout out to one of my favorite Disney movies.
Yeah, but it's funny. But this one, man, like even when you get to the scenes where you know Beast gets his revenge on some them killing Beauty. He fucks them up, man. I mean, he
Oh
tears.
yeah.
I mean, and it's hardcore. Ripping throats, ripping flesh, just ripping the shit out of these. It's pretty brutal. I mean, it looks freaking gory as shit, and it looks like these guys are like literally being attacked by this like menacing German Shepherd, and it's like the whole entire time you're like, fuck yeah, you're rooting for this dog because them obviously taking out Beauty throughout the movie. But yeah, I just love it. It's one of those ones where like it's weird in this movie and in movies just in general. Like, I mean, I always kind of root for bad guys, but then sometimes when bad guys are really really bad, you kind of
Yeah.
don't want to root for them. Like, and it's kind of like in this movie where you're kind of rooting for them a little bit because some of these characters were really annoying and needed to be taken out, but then you're like, okay, yeah, you're doing this, you're watching, you got the underage girl, you're doing shit to a baby, you killed a dog. Yeah, when they start getting their just due in this film, I love the fact that yeah, the dog gets it. And who doesn't, when we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this movie, like who doesn't love a beginning of a movie where yeah your character is basically in I guess one way to say it, he's basically a pussy in this
Yeah.
film. You know what I mean? He doesn't like guns, he doesn't do this, he did that, to being, I guess, the opposite of a final girl, a final guy in this film, to being like a badass, and you're just like, holy shit! Talk about like a 180 from character from the beginning of this movie, where you're like, this guy is a puss. You can't stand him. He's just one of these guys that like, you know what I mean?
Like
It's
you
just like
want him to
you just
die.
want him to die. You're like, oh god, man, like he's a piece of shit. He whines and he doesn't like this, he doesn't like that. You know what I mean? Some would say, the liberal things and stuff like that. Just the way, he just has that California kind of feel to him. Like this guy's a douche nozzle, and then by the end of the movie, you're like, fuck yeah, this guy is badass, man. I love the fact that he just kind of turns it around.
No, absolutely, for sure. I mean, also shout out because again, a lot of you Fangs and Infernos know where, where Vampire lays his head. So a little shout out to Vanessa Shaw for, from my beloved Hocus Pocus. So it was very, very cool to have another movie to talk about that she's involved in. But no, absolutely, Devil. When it comes to this movie, I mean, it's like a brutal body count. I mean, it's a solid, 17 kills, which is great when it comes to this movie as far as like any, Fangs and Infernos or people who are into that kind of like bloodlust. But the thing I also have always liked about this movie, and again, it's not different from the original because it has that same design, it has that same conflict of conscience, is you've got Laura's character, Lauren Ortiz. That's my Market Basket reference from any of you Fangs and Infernos who are unfamiliar with the Holliston series from Adam Green that Devil and I are quite fond of. She's the main character when it comes to that. So anyway, is the idea of what's right versus what's not and self-sacrifice. The idea of like you get the main the main kind of to a certain, it's not like the main survivor, but still the main guy that you originally think is just kind of this obnoxious puss that you just really want to get offed, turning into this kind of Rambo-esque guy as he's trying to get his child back. And then there's that combination of the cannibals just doing what cannibals do, mixed with trying to get his child back, but also mixed with one of them understanding right from wrong. And that's the thing that Lauren's character puts forth there, where it's like she's also the one character who's not overly deformed either. But when you have the idea of this, like, she understands that it's one thing to do what you need to do to survive, but also sacrificing anybody that can't fight for themselves is wrong. And that was the thing I always found very, very interesting about this movie, was they really put it out there. They really didn't leave it up to curiosity as like, well, is this person conflicted? Is it really just or is it that they're part of the family and they know that this is what they have to do to survive? No, you could definitely tell in this movie that she had to decide between right and wrong. And that was something I always found like super duper cool. But it's also a very interesting multiple dynamic as well, because you also have the original, couple that's dealing with a rape situation and there's trauma coming from that, but as a survivor, but they're also still protecting themselves. They're booby trapping their basic like camper, because that's kind of the thing. It has a very like, where people are familiar with the Hills Have Eyes. They might be a little less familiar with the remake, but a lot of our Fangs and Infernos are going to be very familiar with something like House of a Thousand Corpses. And I bring that in where you get these people, they're traveling, they're going to meet family, but they stop at this, this point of interest. And what they think the person, as in Captain Spaulding, is sending them on part of the tour to check out more spooky spots, he's really setting them up for failure. It's that same kind of thing. These people are traveling, they're stopping at a gas station, getting directions to where they need to go. They're like, oh, well, no, go this way because it'll save you time. It'll get you to where you need to go, knowing that it's going to blow out your tires. You're going to be stranded and you're basically just going to be fucked by the people that live in that area. And it's that same kind of thing where this horrific situation happens to this girl, and she's able to survive it, but I use that very loosely because I'm not trying to downplay any potential trigger warnings to any of our fans that follow us and support us. But when it comes to this movie, you've got this survivor of this ordeal. She's able to get out of it, but they know that they're still trapped in this situation. So there's these double stories going on where you've got the home base being protected, while you've also got the heroine, for lack of a better terms, trying to, you know, get back their stolen child. And it's a very just interesting, almost two-story dynamic where it's not set up like an anthology. It's just these two situations that are kind of running parallel.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of funny when you're talking, you talk about, them getting sent to go this other way. There's part of the movie that always made me laugh too, was like, the guy, the clueless guy that was like the wuss that becomes the badass. He goes out and goes, yeah, yeah, it's pretty weird. Like, oh, I walked all this way and there were these people's cars and all this stuff was just left there and blah 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 blah. And they're like, well, yeah, like then he was like, well, yeah, no, this is where the road ended. He didn't think like, okay, the guy told us to go this way. He's like, oh, maybe we missed an exit. No, the guy just straight up told you to go this right and just keep going straight and eventually you'll run into the highway or something like that. Then you realize that okay, this crater is basically the end of the road.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're gonna be like all these cars like, okay, maybe something's wrong. He just comes back with the, fishing pole and a teddy bear and even like yeah, which is funny because they bitch and yell at him, even the brother and stuff like that. Like, well, come on, man, what the hell are you doing with a freaking fishing pole? But then eventually they use the fishing pole, the wire and all that to make the trap. So it's like, oh, maybe that fishing pole you used it for real. But yeah, I love the fact it's like that. Like I said, I love the fact that the old story and of the nuclear fallout. I love how each one of the characters are completely crazy. You got the mama, the big huge mama. This character, you got the guy that's a head that's just basically like this big giant dome head, kind of just like watching them and stuff like that. I love the fact that yeah, that's like, you got the bronze of the guy that's just like running through the damn walls and fucking people up and yeah, I just love the fact that this guy who is a pacifist basically comes into their town. These guys have been doing this for this clan has been doing this probably for hundreds of years because you can see all the cars and all the things. That's been they probably killed a couple hundreds of family, and then you have this one pacifist dude with one dog all of a sudden takes out them. And it's
Yeah,
like
just
how much of a hills have I badasses are you really if you're getting killed by one German Shepherd and a pacifist?
right. No, 100% Devil for sure. But I mean, it's got like really good action. I mean, you've got pickaxe kills, you've got all this crazy stuff, but there's definitely a lot just going on with this movie. But also at the same time, very similar to the original Hills Have Eyes, as we move our way towards the obituaries when it comes to this, is the fact that look, you get your kill, they get the baby, there's this kind of family reunion until you realize that you're being watched through the eyes of binoculars of somebody else. And that was always something I always thought was really cool when I watched it originally. And this is before, because I saw this movie back in the theaters. Like, that was even before you even officially knew that there would be a sequel. And then again, just like the OGs, there was an OG sequel, there's an OG remake. I mean, there's a remake sequel. Um, and I love cliffhanger stuff. Some stuff I get more into than others. Sometimes I'll see the kind of cliffhanger and I kind of have that reaction of like, well, if there's time. But then there's other movies that kind of I'm like, all right, I like that and I'm down for another round. For the record, when it came to the second round, they watered down my whiskey.
Yeah, I
I
mean
was
the thing about the sequel though, as much as the remake of Hills Have Eyes 2 isn't as good as the remake of Hills Have Eyes 1,
yeah.
the remake of Hills Have Eyes 2 is still a bazillion times better
Oh,
than the sequel to the original Hills Have Eyes 2. I was like, so I mean, theoretically, you think it's a
truer words were
better
never
remake.
spoken.
That's the astronomical. Like I said, not even saying that because like I said, the remake of Part 2 isn't that great, but
No.
compared to the original Part 2, it's a masterpiece.
If we so like for the sake of this particular showdown, it's just more proper to start with it just works out that way. Yes, Hills Have Eyes, and again, I do feel this way. That's one of the reasons why I picked it, and you were down for it when we were discussing it. Look, I've met Michael Berryman, and that's what I had him sign. Despite the fact that he's not actually the main character of the original Hills Have Eyes, the first time I ever had Michael Berryman, he's always been, and again, this might have a lot to do with his look because, he has built a career off of his look and certain health situations that are not normal. but he has always been the main guy kind of focused on for the original Hills Have Eyes, despite the fact he's kind of a secondary character. So anyway, the first time I ever met Michael Berry, well, frankly, the only time I met Michael Berryman, what I had him sign was my Hills Have Eyes DVD because he is the main person on the fucking cover, despite being a secondary character. But that just is what it is. But I do still feel that this is a better remake, and that's one of the reasons why I picked it. You agreed with it. It worked best for this situation. But fuck, Devil, you're not wrong, dude. When you talk about what might possibly be the gold standard of a better remake, The Hills Have Eyes 2 remake versus The Hills Have Eyes 2 original, it is such a vicious, brutal stomping of the original because while the second remake does not hold a candle to the original, in my opinion, and it seems that's your opinion as well, it is psychotically better than the original sequel to the original. It is like kind of shocking how bad and lopsided that is.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
for
got a really
sure.
great cover. It's got a really great movie poster and a really great DVD cover. I actually like it quite a bit. It's kind of this weird psychedelic multicolored thing. But as far as a film, it's shockingly inferior.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's probably like I said, it's probably on there where like if you were gonna go better sequels or better remakes of a second movie, like of a sequel, then it would probably be up there as the best remake. And like I said, it's not even that remake is amazing. It's just because of how horrible the original is
Yeah.
that remake makes it seem astronomically better.
It's definitely crazy, man. But anyway, Devil, when it comes to the obituaries, like here's the thing, man. Honestly, I'll keep it pretty short and sweet when it comes to this. I really do like this movie. I hold it in high regards. I like the way it's shot. I like the use of the characters. I love the plot, and I like the parallel storylines. Do I think it's the most epically awesome movie or of all time? Hell no. It's never going to be up there for me. But as far as just a movie, in the idea of the obituaries of a movie that I think is just quality an enjoyable experience if you're into that bloodlust and you're not overly squeamish. Because, again, just like you and I have discussed, there are genuine trigger warnings for people in real life that's important to at least mention is a possibility in this movie because there's some real life things that can happen in real life in this movie. Overall, I really do find this to be a really solid movie. I think it's well written. I think it's well shot. And I think they put some real thought into the story they were trying to tell, knowing that it's a remake. I don't go overly high, but I do think it's of quality. I like this movie at a 7.5.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I think a 7.5 is a good one because like I said, when it comes to the remakes and stuff like that, like I said, I think uh I think this one is one of the better ones, when it comes to it. Just because like you said, you kind of modernized it a little bit more. You made it where it had a little bit more of a budget, a little bit more, like I said, the original ones being, the original being done in the 70s,
Yeah.
kind of had that, 70s feel to it. So, like I said, and like you were talking about before with the Dawn of the Dead, I mean, I know a lot of people will talk about it and stuff like that. I have no problems with that Dawn of the Dead remake. I think it's
Yeah.
really amazing. I just don't think it's better than the original
Same.
movie, but I think as far as remakes go, it's one of the better remakes out there. It's just that we're talking about remakes that are better than the original. And
Yeah.
like I said, even though I do really love the Dawn of the Dead remake, I just don't think it's as good as the original one. Where the same way with
Agreed.
this, I really, like I said, I love the original Hills Have Eyes. I've always loved that, but I felt like this is a
It's
better
a better
version of the Hills
representation.
Have Eyes. Yep. So I'm down with that 7.5. I think 7.5 is a good scoring for the Alexander Aja's Heels Have Eyes.
Absolutely, my friend. So let's get into another gentleman who we hold in high regard. Like I said, I love Crispin Glover's like just ability to be an absolutely bitchin' character actor because I really do think that he's underappreciated in that role. But let's talk as I pass it over to you, my friend. Let's talk about his relationship with many, many Master Splinters.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Crispin Glover, I've always been a fan of him. Unfortunately, a lot of people have said that he's hard to work with because he's a very character actor. He definitely is very eccentric and definitely, wants things done a certain way, and he kind of off puts a lot of people. But I've always been a huge fan of his. Like you were talking about, Back to the Future, stuff like that. I even throw, when you throw in, the Charlie's Angels, I'll throw in a little funny bone there with the hot tub time machine. You know what I
Oh,
mean? With
dude,
the whole
absolutely.
entire time you're
The
waiting
fucking arm.
for the arm to go off. I mean, I thought that character was great. I've always been a fan of his. I just love his weird kookiness and stuff like that. I always felt like he would be before, I guess, before we got to Tim Burton's doing the remake of Willy Wonka, I always thought that Crispin Glover would be the perfect Willy Wonka because he's just that weird, kooky, creepiness, to him and to his characters and actors. And like I
Devil, that
said,
is not a bad thought, bro. Like, I think because of Johnny's relationship, long-standing relationship with Tim, is probably the reason why, like, that probably went
yeah,
down that
I
way.
mean,
But with
Tim
what
did
you
put
said,
him in
sorry,
Alice
Devil,
in
real quick,
Wonderland.
brother, but like you said, dude, now that it's rattling in my brain, dude, that would have been cool.
I mean, Tim definitely is under radar. I mean, he was in the Alice in Wonderland.
Yep.
He was the king of the Knight of Knives or
The Nine
whatever
of
it is.
Knives.
Yeah. So I mean, he was on there, but yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge fan, and like I said, I've always been a huge fan of the original Willard. To me, I mean, I've liked the original Willard. I've always been. I mean, if we want to go better sequels, I've always thought Ben was a better movie. I've always liked Ben. I've always liked it because I'm a huge Michael Jackson fan and I love the song Ben. And I think it's kind of funny that this is a remake of the original Willard, but they do put the Ben song in this movie.
I
And
thought
then
that was cool too.
and the two versions that they put in this is so great. So you finally get Ben the song in it. And yeah, unfortunately it's during one of the most brutal and sad parts of the movie because it's the part where the cat gets killed by all the rats, and you're like, your whole time you're like, man, I'm feeling real bad for this cat. You know what I mean? You're like, God damn it, why they?
But for the record, Mrs. Vamp was upstairs for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say she definitely wouldn't like that scene, but I do like whenever they bring back the Ben song, they give it a little Crispin Glover spin to it, and he's singing the song, and I always thought that was really cool. But like I said, I've always liked this movie. I think it's just a cool movie. It's got like I said, it's got him and it's got Arlie Army in it. I'm a huge fan of his. Full Metal Jacket and all that kind of stuff like that. I've always been a fan of his, and he just plays those asshole characters that you
Oh
just
God.
hate. And you mean the whole entire time you're just like rooting for Crispin. You're like, you can't wait till, you get to the scene where he gets his demise, and you know what I mean? So, you know, like I said, I've always liked this movie. I've always liked it because it's just, it's very, even the storyline of it's very psycho kind of like feel to it, where
100%.
he's living with his mother. His mother is like not the greatest person in the world, and he was more of like he was more of his dad kind of a person, but his dad had passed away. I mean, in this movie, his dad committed suicide, but him living with the mom, and the mom kind of like, no, you're a dirty boy, or no, you can't do this, or no, you can't do
Kind of got
that.
a
It's
bit of
just
a carry that feel.
Carrie feel to it, very psycho, you know what I mean? Like that Norman Bates kind of character. So you understand like the loneliness of this character and like him, befriending, what would be rats. And that's what I like about this movie too, is like, in a world, and even though this movie is not that super old, it still came out in like, I think it came out in 2004 maybe,
Three.
or three. So around there. So like 20 some years ago, in the world of 2000s where you're pretty much CGI and everything, I give kudos to them using over 500 real rats that were
Right.
all trained for specific reasons. These rats are meant to go up this
Plans
thing,
in that
rats to go
career.
doing that, rats that are made to chew, rats that were trained to do this, rats that were trained to do that, rats that were trained to go into the briefcases. You know what I mean? I love the fact that, yeah, it's the real rats, and Ben's a big motherfucker.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Devil, for sure. And that's the thing I always found like really, really interesting too, is because of course you've got, Willard, his obsession with like Socrates, like his first real friend. But then you kind of have Ben, who's like the jealous lover, like kind of that like second banana who like obviously gets a name because you don't hear names so much for like the rest of them. There's Socrates, there's Ben, and there's everybody else. Um, and that was the thing I always found like really, really interesting. And it was this very bizarre dynamic where it was like, hey, did Ben just always want to be the power player? So did he dislike the fact that Socrates was the favorite and he was basically the guy that Willard always told to go do stuff? Take the rats to go this. Tell them, chew, tear it up, do all that kind of stuff. But then when it came to Arlie Ermy, you know, killing Socrates, and you watch Ben watching, you see Willard watching, and then they circle back around to it where he's like, it wasn't my fault. You saw that there was nothing I could do. Was it really, though, that Ben was pissed at Willard for letting Socrates die? Or was Ben happy that his particular competition was eliminated and allowed him to be the main dominant figure? Because again, you can say what you want about the Willard character as a human, as a big, broad force. That doesn't change the fact that any one big, broad force, if you're going up against a smaller, littler force, that's one thing. And that would be like Bigfoot stepping on a Smurf. But Bigfoot going up against 500 Smurfs, suddenly the ideas, the potential, you know, how am I trying to say it? Basically, it's like a level playing field. It's like more like that. It's like, okay, you look at this big dominant figure easily able to squash something small. But if there's a lot of small things, now they've got a real dog in the fight and they can kind of carry them on. Just like we were talking about with Dawn of the Dead earlier. It's like, look, one or two zombies, you can get away from them. But at the same time, if there's a shit ton of zombies, now all of a sudden you realize that you've got a lot to worry about. And that was the one thing I thought was really cool. I loved the idea of Arlie Ermy being this kind of like prick that like did or didn't fuck over the family and take over the business, and basically is like, you're only employed here due to a technicality because I promised your family that you would always have a job here, but you're a shitbag and I hate you and you waste my time. But just like you said, Arlie Ermy is an amazing character actor for that kind of, again, Full Metal Jacket, you know, comparison, but like that just kind of like aggressive, militant, dictator type. He's just great in those roles. Even something more on a comedy aspect of like Saving Silverman, if you've ever seen that movie, Devil,
Yeah.
Arlie has that same type of delivery and it's fantastic. But anyway, staying on point, it's the idea of like Willard being shackled kind of under the thumb because this is my dad's company. Well, be that as it may, your dad's no longer in charge. So he's got this kind of strength to it. But that doesn't change the fact that, like, he's got his lackeys that are fulfilling all of his wishes in both execution as far as just as far as torment when it comes to the tires. But is Willard as in control as he thinks he is? Or is there a little bit of this, AI type situation when it comes to like nowadays, when, we talk about movies like Megan, for example, where AI is such a dominant thing? Again, you want to boss around these rats, but what happens if they all realize that they are better strength in numbers? So it's a very interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, I mean, especially like especially in the beginning of the film, you know, what I mean, I love it whenever he goes out to destroy the bosses, Ariel Emery's car, you know what I mean? He's just like, no, Ben, you can't go because if you go into the suitcase, nobody else can fit because you're too damn big. And you know what happens? He's not paying attention. All the rats go in. Ben goes in. All the rats go back out because he's too big. And then he goes and like, first of all, how do you go that much of a distance and realize that you would know the difference? I mean, even like weight. I
Wait,
mean, even weight wise. Let's say this one rat still weighs the same as 20 or 30 rats, but 20 or 30 rats spread over would just the weight distribution would you would notice like, okay, this weighs about the same, but why does it seem it's only centered in this one spot versus overall? So I'm never, so it was like, okay, but obviously he opens it up, it's freaking Ben. He's like, oh damn it, you know, whatever, Ben, you're too fat to get in underneath there anyway. Oh yeah, right. I'll just take out more. I can bite more chunks. And I kind of feel like that's how it was, when Socrates gets killed. I feel like, like you said, he's favored Socrates. Socrates is number one. Socrates is the boss. Socrates gets, he's got to stay down in the basement and, with all the other rats. Socrates gets to go upstairs and gets to sleep with Willard and kind
the
of
cushy
get
bed.
get to bed and get all that kind of stuff like that. So obviously, the jealousy of Socrates, and then him going into the bag with him go to work, and he's like, "No, you can't go to work with me." And Socrates is like, "Come on, man. Let's just, let's all get together and be all good." And he's like, "I'm gonna let you go because Socrates." And I kind of feel like when it came to that, that was Ben's whole motive. I believe that the rat that the girl saw to begin with was Ben
Yeah.
because he's so big, he's kind of hard not to not notice. But then he hid, and obviously, whenever he was hiding good enough, she was, poking around, and obviously Socrates couldn't go, and she's like, "Oh, see, I saw a rat," and then Socrates got it. So, in my opinion, I always felt like Ben basically sacrifice Socrates. But like you said, because he knew that once he got Socrates out of there, he would be number one. He would be that, but he really wasn't the whole entire time. He's crying. He put Socrates in the ashes with his dad's urn and all that, and then that's when he's like, okay, he tries to trick him and tries to give Ben the food with the poison. With the rat poison in the trap in there, and Ben's like, yeah, gets trapped and takes off an arm, but Ben's like, yeah, I might be able to. I can survive with one hand, but you got to realize, man, now you just fucked up because, yeah, you think the rats are loyal to you, but the rats are actually loyal to me. I'm
Yeah.
the big macho. I'm the boncho. Yeah, you might have thought Socrates was number one. Socrates was your favorite, but Socrates didn't demand the army. So, if Big Ben told those rats, "Don't chew, don't go in things," Socrates wouldn't have gotten it straight. Big Ben, this was my house. This has always been Big Ben's house, and that's why he was kind of getting pissed. He's like, he's the one that's, the muscle in this army of rats, and he's not getting. Socrates is kind of just there. He's just a pretty face. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? In the thing, and yeah, he gets it. And like you said, when you piss off you big honcho, like you said, when you piss off AI, eventually, AI is gonna realize, hey man, I don't need you. And they're like, shit, we don't need this guy, man. Like fuck him, man. We can do whatever we want to do. we've revolutionized. We know how to harmonize. We know how to work, and we know how to do it. And I just love the fact that, yeah, it's just like the little bit of rats that you see throughout the movie, especially with him going in the bag and stuff like that. But when you
Yeah.
see all those rats, man, in the house, man, when they're going after him after it's bad, it's like, Jesus, man, that's a lot of fucking rats, man. It's like I said, especially even like you feel like, even like the cat scene in that scene, you know what I mean? He sees that one little one and he goes up, and then all of a sudden he gets up on the counter, gets up on that, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh shit, he sees more, and then he jumps trying to get, but you knew that hole was where Ben liked to lay around and chill, so he was gonna go, and then cat flops down, like, yep, I'm sorry, cat, you may be, bigger, but with thousands of rats, you're a goner. And the same thing with that. That's why I love the fans and infernos who may have seen the original Willard. That's what I liked about this original. I mean, I like the ending of the original one, because in the original one they do kill Will. They do kill him. Where I
Yeah.
like in this one where he kind of goes crazy. They're like, yeah, this dude's living in a house full of rats, man. He's nuts. He obviously, we found out, they figured out that he was, the girl found out that he's the one that went and sent these rats to kill his boss. So they put him in a mental institution, and, lo and behold, another little rat comes out. Another Socrates 2 comes out.
I know it, and it's funny, Devil, because it's got similarities to the ending of Psycho, and that's the only thing. And I'll go a little bit more into detail, but it's one of the few things that I didn't love as much with this movie as a sequel. While it's definitely still, I agree with you that it's 100% a better sequel, but
Remake.
I felt, I'm sorry, yeah, remake, is that it went a little bit off the grid when it came to influences. And again, I love influences. I love when people put their heart on their sleeve and also, show things that matter to them. But you and I have spoken about Carrie, we've spoken about Psycho. And that was a very kind of interesting direction for them to go with the remake, where the original movie had this definitive end. The remake was almost also a retelling of a different movie completely. And it was just kind of that unique thing where, of course, when it comes to Psycho, it was all about that fly buzzing around almost like a friend. But he's like, you know what? I'm just going to show that I'm okay, that I would never even hurt a fly. And it had that same kind of feel to it, where Socrates number two, same look, same color, kind of came out as like his new friend. And I always found that to be kind of an interesting thing where when I was watching the movie, I mean, I already knew about it because I had seen Willard. But revisiting it, and again, when you and I watch movies for discussion, you kind of pay attention a little bit closer. And it's like, yeah, I remember all of that. But I'm like, I feel like I have to address that, or I don't know how I necessarily feel that. Again, does not take away from my good time. I think the movie's great. But it was a very, very interesting choice when it comes to changing the ending. Kind of kind of reminds me of like, we didn't do this as a better remake, but back when we talked about My Bloody Valentine, the end of those movies are very similar, but they're backwards. And that was kind of a very interesting way to do it. When you're remaking a movie that was designed this way with this story to tell, but then you're flipping or tweaking two characters to tell a different outcome. And that was just something I found very interesting. Again, I love the idea. It at least as of right now, it has never come to fruition. I love the idea of a Willard 2 if they really decided to take a real shot at it. You obviously need Willard, and in my opinion, you need Crispin to portray that again properly. But I did find that to be very interesting that for a remake movie, they did a different ending. And it wasn't so much that, but it did feel to me like they did another person's ending. And I found that to be a little bit of a questionable direction. But again, doesn't take away from my good time. I just found it was a unique way to go. And I am a firm believer in like wearing your influences on your sleeve. So I do like to reiterate that point. But for a completely different design of movie that had similarities because of the mom factor, I felt it was a little bit strange, a little odd to go that direct with the ending, where it matched up a little bit too close to comfort, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can definitely see that. But like I said, I kind of liked it. I liked it better where, it didn't end, it didn't end the way that it was, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, I mean, the only other way to end it from him not dying is to go into a mental institution. So
100%.
I kind of feel like that's really the only way, unless he miraculously gets away somehow. But I just didn't see how that was going to happen either. So it's like either, you only have three outcomes. He gets killed, you know, gets locked up, and no one's going to put him in a prison. They're going to put him in a mental institution, and or he escapes, or not escapes, but like, you know, doesn't get caught. But I was like, I kind of feel like that wasn't really a particular ending that would work very well either. So maybe they did it. Maybe they did an ending where they kind of like saw it and was like, okay, tested it and didn't really like the him getting away or something like that. They wanted to
Good
change
point.
it, so they were like, oh, okay, let's just do this, even though yeah, people may or may not add similarities to, like you said, the ending of Psycho and stuff like that. So like I said, who knows? But like I said, I always felt like it could have, it leaned itself to a possibility of a sequel. Where, like you said, like in the original one, you figured it wasn't going to be a sequel, and then they did make a sequel, but it wasn't quite a sequel that you were expecting. It was more
Right.
of Ben. It was Ben's sequel and not
And
Willard's
story.
sequel.
Yeah. No, 100% Devil for sure, man. And as we pop into the obituaries, as we decide how we want to end this showdown and compare them against each other, what are you thinking there, my friend?
I mean, for me, like I said, I mean, honestly, before we started to give the Hills Have Eyes remake the score that we gave, which we both agreed on 7.5. I was kind of feeling that that's where I was gonna go with Willard, but I kind of feel like if we went that way, if I was gonna go 7.5 with Willard, I would had to have gone a little bit lower with Hills Have Eyes. Because not saying that I don't think that the Hills Have Eyes remake is not a better remake. I just think that the original Hills Have Eyes is strong film. And the remake is a better remake, but it's also a strong film. Where I
Sure.
feel like the original Willard was a good movie, but not nearly as good as the remake is. So like
Definitely agree there.
like in a world where like if we gave the original Hills Have Eyes, let's say obviously we gave the remake a 7.5. So let's say we would probably maybe give the remake a 6.5 or a 7, or the original one a 6.5 or a 7.
Yeah,
Where okay, so if we agreed on Willard being a 7.5, the remake, the original, I would go as low as saying a 5 or a
agreed.
5.5, because I think that this movie is good, but the original one, like I said, it was okay, but I was always more of a fan of Ben versus the Willard one.
Yeah,
So
this one's
so
definitely superior.
yeah, so for me, that's the only reason why I'm gonna say 8.0 for Willard, because if we're gonna go, I think that this this remake was better because it's more superior than the original film. Where yes, The Hills Have Eyes is a better remake, but it's not that much superior over the original.
I can definitely get with you on that, Devil. I definitely understand there. So I don't match you at 8. I actually go to 7 personally, but this is the way I see it. Again, it's going to land at a 7.5 collectively, so it'll end in a tie, but and we'll have a little brief discussion on how we see things going. So again, I like Willard. Again, I love Crispin Glover, so much amazing movies that he's been in, stuff that I've addressed, stuff that you've addressed. When it comes to the movie, I just think it's not so much a lacking. It's again, just like you said, incredibly strong, and it's vastly superior to its original counterpart, where Hills Have Eyes is still superior, but its counterpart is closer. It's a better designed movie. But I do look at Willard as an overall 7.0 for myself personally. Again, I like the movie. I enjoyed it. I think Crispin is great. But there's a simplicity, but also a little bit too close to an original movie idea that I felt that it is great when movies, like I said, hold inspirations on their, show their inspirations on their sleeve. Though when certain choices are made that I think are a little bit too much like what might have inspired you, that is some stuff that I notice, and that's stuff that I look at personally. So again, while there's so much Psycho with touches of Carrie to it, which I'm all for, it's the end of the movie being a different design from the original Willard and being a little bit closer to what might have caused its inspiration is something that I do feel I need to address and is something that I do take into my consideration. So anyway, that being said, I see it as a 7. We tend to meet in the middle at a 7.5 as long as you're cool with that. Now, that being said, with them both being a tie, I do feel there's an overall dynamic when it comes to The Hills Have Eyes that I do think is an overall stronger movie and an overall stronger execution. While it's still closer to what brought it to the dance, where there's differences to the new Willard that separated from the original Willard, which I think is worth taking into consideration because that can often be very strong. And I do think also does make for a stronger movie. I do think that Hills Have Eyes has the potential to sit as a solid standalone movie itself versus Willard, I do think has the tendency to make more people wonder if it's a little bit too similar to a Psycho than its own standalone style. So while I do think they are both tied in their strengths, I do swing the needle to Hills Have Eyes personally for the idea of a potential stronger movie where you don't think about something else versus Willard, where I think you do. But I do want to say that with that cannibalistic post apocalyptic feel, not fully post apocalyptic, obviously, because then you wouldn't have characters like the broken down, RV, House of a Thousand Corpses style. There are similarities, but I do feel like Hills Have Eyes, if you left it alone, has the potential to kind of be its own thing where Willard has the ability and maybe triggers more of your other interests. Again, not necessarily a bad thing. I just feel like it might make you wonder on if a little bit too much was pulled by something that, preceded it, as opposed to just going by itself. But that's kind of how I look at it. It's a very, very close meter, but I kind of see the needle swinging towards Hills Have Eyes personally. But I'll tell you, Devil, I really do think it's close.
I guess I understand where you're coming from. I don't know though. I feel like, if you're talking about the changes, I mean, there's the changes in Hills Have Eyes are even different. Those were
100%.
just they were just in the original one they were just people who lived in the hills. They made them, they made this one more about the contamination of nuclear fallout and stuff like that, which that has been done over and over and over again too as
Facts.
well.
Can't take that
So
away from you. That's a really good
and
point.
yeah, and to nod. I mean, the nod towards Carrie, maybe a little bit. The nod towards Psycho, you really can't blame anyone for doing that, since Psycho is the epitome of what became horror films. It's the original, like, mainstream horror film. You know what I mean? That is like the first big, huge action, horror film that basically what presents what to everybody. So I mean, and you got to realize, like, yeah, it's a little bit of that. I mean, it's just, I mean, I think a lot of it's just because the fact that if you if you didn't have him being at home with a mother, you wouldn't get those references to Psycho. But then
Fair enough.
again, if he wasn't a loner that didn't have an overbearing mom that made him weird and kooky and unlikable as a character and unlikable in the society, then he wouldn't have befriended a rat to begin with. Normal people aren't befriending rats. People
That's
who have
that's
been,
true.
or people who are shut in, who are, lived by an obedient mother or an obedient father that live under their wing are going to be the lonely types that are going to be the weirdos that are going to eventually end up becoming friends with a rat or killing their mother and digging him up and talking to his mother and dressing up as his mother and stuff like that. I
You're
mean,
you're
if his
definitely
mom wasn't that way, Norman Bates wouldn't have done any of that kind of stuff if his mom
true.
wasn't that way. So
And
it's
you're definitely not wrong on that too, Devil, because there are also certain things to keep in mind too, that even with the changes, whether I feel that they're eerily reminiscent of a previous movie doesn't change the fact that it is a climactic finish to Willard, which actually plays to its strengths, as opposed to Hills Have Eyes, which sets up for a sequel that it did have that may or may not, depending on the person you talk to and depending on whether they did or didn't like it, that may or may not have hurt it in a long run, depending on whether or not the second movie had enough strengths compared to the first. Me personally, I don't think the second Hills Have Eyes remake is on the same level as the original. And it damn sure does not show that the second original remake is absolutely not on the level of the original when it came to Wes Craven's design. So that's also something that's worth taking into consideration too, is Willard does have strength in a standalone be all end all with hints to what started the genre, where again, there's a lot of strength in The Hills Have Eyes. I really enjoy that movie. I can watch it more than once. I can watch it somewhat regularly. I don't, but I can. And that's something that you know, again, both of us having very, very massive collections, things kind of like get lost occasionally in the shuffle. But can I watch The Hills Have Eyes on the regular? I absolutely do. I mean, I absolutely can. I just don't. But that's more because it's got so much other stuff that a person can watch. But I will say that Willard definitely does have strength as a standalone movie compared to The Hills Have Eyes, which ends with a teaser to a sequel that did happen that, depending on who you ask, might have enhanced it, might have also hurt it.
Yeah, I mean, well, so I mean, well, I'm gonna pose a thing. Let's go by the strength of the two big names in this films. Let's go with, we'll go with obviously with our Buffalo Bill.
Yep.
Now I'm drawing a blank of his the actual actor's name for a second, but and Vanessa Shaw, obviously from from Hocus Pocus
Yeah,
as
Ted
the two.
Levine. Ted Levine.
Yeah, Ted Levine. So we're gonna put those two as the two big hitters in this film. So we have those two, and then we'll put Ari Ermy and Crispin Glover. Who do you like as the better pair as far
I
as
put a
like
spell on you. Now
as
you're
far as character, yeah, but as far as either character wise or
fucking.
like in their movie wise, yes, who doesn't love Ted Levine? We love him. Buffalo Bill, he's been in other stuff, but everybody just knows him more for Buffalo Bill. That's his big one movie. Where Vanessa Shaw, we love her. She's been in a bunch of other stuff like that. But the big one people are going to remember are Hocus Pocus. I put it on you with Ari Lermy. He's got a roster of films that you'll remember him from. Crispin Glover has a roster of films that you'll remember him from. That's my only reason why I lean a little bit more towards if we're going to do it that way with the cast, with Ari Lermy and Crispin Glover taking the
I'll give
taking.
it to you, Devil. Nope, it's all good. You and I have talked casts many, many times, and you're not wrong. A good point is a good point because, again, just like you said, Ted and Vanessa have really great catalogs.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
both have that dynamic, heavy hitter where you're like, Jesus, like you get hit by Silence of the Lambs, or you get hit by Hocus Pocus, your jaw's going to be sore. You're going to have felt that shot. But again, if you just take the simplisticness of just the minimal part of Crispin and Arlie Ermey's catalogs, you're taking Willard, Saving Silverman, and again, I'm just using that as a basic cushion, but again, Full Metal Jacket. And then you're also taking Willard, you know, Charlie's Angels, again, that's my cushion one, but then you've also got Back to the Future, where you've got, at least two per person against one per person. So ultimately, Devil, I can't get mad at you for it, man, because you do make a really good point. Because when it comes to movies and when it comes to execution of films and certain showdowns, it's not uncommon and very much a regularity that the cast of a movie matters in the long run. So at a 7.5, can we agree at the numbers for 7.5 per? But we'll give it to you, Devil. You can't argue against a good point that holds merit. So that's the way it's going to be, Fangs and Infernos. Bam! Victory to the Devil in a very, very awesome showdown and an excellent, excellent point when it comes to the secondary follow-up of what ultimately is a tie at 7.5 for the Hills Have Eyes remake and a 7.5 at Willard, the remake. But all kudos and recognition to the points that Devil made when it came to strength of cast. While again, we understand that sometimes you can get a little bit too close when it comes to what brought you to the dance and your inspirations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a detriment to your movie. And again, so much strength when it came to The Hills Have Eyes, when it comes to the movie that it was versus the movie it came from, and whether or not a sequel enhanced or took away from the franchise is different strokes for different folks. But we're going to keep it at how we discussed it. And at matching scores, we're going to give all of the credit for the very, very excellent point that cast matters. So again, victory to the Devil. At a 7.5, Willard will take out Hills Have Eyes at a 7.5 as well. Fangs and Infernos, we love you guys to death. We appreciate all the support that you give myself and, of course, the Devil with everything that we get to do when it comes to the Vampire and Devil podcast. Now, that also means showing love to the people that look out for us. So please go over to rockandhorror.com and support our friends Mark and Lizzie, because that is the only place that you can get exclusive Vampire and Devil merch is at rockandhorror.com under the Vampire and Devil collab category. If you like it hot, just like the Devil, please make sure that you're having your tea and enjoying brutalities. Our friends are fantastic. So many amazing flavors and everything that they do. And we really appreciate all of the support that they give us. So please make sure that you're supporting brutalities and all of their amazing flavors. They're at all kinds of cons and they really, really put the grind in. Also, our buddy Chris at the Buffalo Bill House. Since we were talking about Ted Levine, let's
Yeah,
talk
we're talking about Buffalo himself.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about Buffalo Bill. Our buddy Chris owns the Buffalo Bill House. It is an amazing bed and breakfast experience. Not traditional bed and breakfast. You own the house for the duration of your stay. It's an amazing experience. Myself, Devil, Mrs. Vamp, we all went there as a group. We had an amazing time. Dude, Chris, we love you, brother. And of course, our friends Chris and Saren, who own Twisted Vines for all your creepy decor. We really, really appreciate them as well. And of course, our beloved John Kozik, who owns, the Salem Witchboard Museum and the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. Please support these amazing independent museums to keep them in the forefront and keep them populated and keep them with us. But that's the way it's going to be. Circling it back around, Devil takes this one as Willard takes out The Hills Have Eyes. We'll see you soon. Horns up. Fangs out. Devil, my friend, I think we should have a little quick conversation about everybody's respectful celestial abodes, where it be my little coffin where I lay my head at night, or at times that you feel that you just want to go back down to make sure that hell's not getting out of whack while you are away. Let's talk about it. Vampire and Devil's newest partnership in Twisted Vines, our dear friends, Chris and Sarah and Cadaver.
Oh yeah, you like scary stuff, you like horror decor, come and check out Twisted Vines. They make all the kind of cool shit, all for your house, all kinds of scary shit. They love it. You like to bring back the horror, you want to scare your neighbors, you want to conjure up a friend to talk to, you want to conjure up somebody bad, you want to do some bad stuff to them, you go to Twisted Vines and get some of their merch.
Absolutely, for sure. Everything is completely handmade by them. So if you need a little friend, maybe around set abode, maybe you want to conduct a little evil towards a friend that was a friend, maybe no longer a friend. They have voodoo dolls they can do for you to allow for such activities. But you know how much we love our Ouija boards, my friend, and they make all of those by hand. They took care of your beloved vampire with a nice Nosferatu board, but the devil, he happens to be a Munsters fan. And not only do they do boards as traditional rectangles, but they can put a little bit of coffin flair in them.
Oh yeah, look at that coffin shape monster board. Yeah, you wanna conjure up Mr. Herman? You wanna ask him how Pet Cemetery was? You can do it on this board. Oh yeah.
Absolutely, my friend. So again, thank you so much to Twisted Vines for partnering with the Vampire and Devil podcast, and make sure that you Fangs and Infernos are checking them out on their Facebook page, on their Instagram pages, and making sure that you are checking them out as they move around the country, showing their craft off at all of the various horror cons and oddities expos that they love to do. So absolutely, my friend, of course, man, horns up, fangs out for our friends at Twisted Vines.
Oh yeah.
What's up? It's the devil here again, and we're gonna talk about more movies with the devil in it. Let's talk a little bit about Satan. Satan in South Park, that is. Hey, guy. Yeah, we're gonna talk about South Park, Uncut and Bigger. Oh yeah, do you watch this movie? Do you watch this show? Do you like Matt Stone and Trey Parker? Do you like Satan? Do you like Saddam Hussein? Do you like Kyle's mom? Even though she's a big old bitch, and she's the biggest bitch in the whole wide world, she's no bitch, everyone's bitch for all the boys and girls. Anyway, I love South Park. I love these guys. I love Satan. I love the devil. I am the devil. Yeah, I am the devil, but I am not the South Park Satan. But anyway, you gotta watch this movie. It's bigger. It's uncut. It's like the shows now on Paramount. It's unfiltered. They can swear. Ooh, there's so much swearing in this movie. Anyway, go watch South Park because the devil said so. Before I make your mom a big old bitch.
Fangs and Infernos, ghouls, goblins, spooks, and creeps. What goes well with Halloween? Just about everything. But does Disney work for Halloween? And that is the question that me and the devil want to ask you. What do you think of Disney when it comes to horror? I'll tell you, devil, my friend, I will say there's a place for horror in all things, including Disney. Oh, sorry, dude. Pause us.
Nope.
Fangs and Infernos, our beloved ghouls, goblins, spooks, and creeps. My beloved devil and I have a question to pose to you, and that is, when it comes to horror, what doesn't it go with? Some might say it doesn't go with Disney. We say that's rubbish. However, there's curiosities behind that, with Disney being so family friendly. What you might think of that Walt gentleman is for another conversation. But, Devil, my friend, we found a way to talk a little bit about horror involved in Disney as we went way back to some of the mortals of the 80s. We were still relatively older gentlemen back then. But what do you say we talk a little bit about the Return to Oz and Something Wicked This Way Comes? Because I know You've been dying to talk about something wicked this way comes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like, when people think of, Halloween horror and Disney, obviously people are gonna go, oh, they're gonna talk Hocus Pocus. Well, yeah, Hocus Pocus is definitely a Halloween Disney staple, but you know, when it comes to like Disney and things like that, that's always weird. You can do like that and stuff like that, but you gotta go old school and like these two, man, especially, you got, Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is my favorite Disney film of all time as far as a live action Disney film. And then you got Return to Oz, which is just, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's horror as much as like Something Wicked, but it's definitely like you watch it now, it's not as bad, but as a kid,
It's got a creep
it
factor.
was really creepy, just the way that it looks, and we'll talk about it. But yeah, just the way certain characters are looking, or way things are done and shot, and things like that is definitely a very creepy factor. Which I remember as a kid, as a young kids would be like, "Ooh, that movie was scary," and you're like, "Eh, not really. I just got done watching Halloween and Jaws and all that." But I can understand it being a little creepy. Yeah, it was definitely creepy. I wouldn't go as far as scary, but yeah, Something Wicked though, then was always the top of mind. I'm a huge fan of not only just the movie but a huge fan of the book. Ray, I was a huge Ray Bradbury fan, so I was super excited. As a kid and stuff like that. And like you said, yeah, I've been trying to figure out a way that we can squeeze that in. And yeah, like I said, who doesn't want to talk about Return to Oz? With one of our actresses that we love, Fairuza Balk. So who doesn't
Yes.
want to go and talk about her? And the at least the third time that she's been a witch in her career, if maybe more, but at least three notable witches that she's been. So and maybe maybe there'll be some creepy stuff added into it, stuff like that. But who never knows? You never know what we're gonna do when we go to the land of Oz, or when the train comes for you.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. So when it comes to the Return to Oz, of course, Devil, you and I are big Fairuza Balk fans, and so is Mrs. Vamp. Like she has been so hyped up for whatever con we get to do that will bring her in. Like a lot of the Fangs and Infernos know that we're regulars at MMC. Monster Mania has always been great to us. We don't really get to do the press thing for them because that's just not really their jam. But they bring in great guests, so we just love to go as fans. And that was going to be our last opportunity to go see her, but unfortunately, she had to cancel due to travel situations. But anyway, between you, myself, and of course, Mrs. Vamp, and I can imagine Mrs. Devil would be down for the cause as well because I mean, it's Fairuza Balk. That is definitely something that we will look forward to. But I've always been a huge Return to Oz fan. This has always been one of my favorite movies just from my childhood. Like there's a lot of movies that there's like a handful of movies, I mean, that like I genuinely grew up, just loving as a kid that I watched on the regular. And that was The Return to Oz, Roald Dahl's The Witches, and The Last Unicorn. Those are just three movies, that I was always just very passionate about when I was young and loved watching. And I've always loved this movie. I love the fact that as a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, it's got enough casualness to it to make you understand that it is, yes, a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, with Judy Garland that everybody's familiar with. But this is much more, I would say that the closest comparison to this would be something like Johnny Depp and Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where there's Gene Wilder and Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, and that's what everybody knows and loves and probably is still particularly fond of as their number one, even myself included, despite the fact that we love our Tim Burton, I love Johnny Depp. But yeah, the OG Willy Wonka is still my overall preference out of those two movies. But the reason I'm going in that, and I bring that up, is that as a Roald Dahl fan, like he was genuinely my favorite author growing up as a kid. I loved his books, all of them. James and the Giant Peach, Fantastic Mr. Fox, the BFG. I can go all day. Anyway, um, I loved the fact that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Tim Burton was much more book accurate. And that's where I'm going with this. It's in our notes and you know it as well, but The Return to Oz is much more about the Wizard of Oz books specifically. Even the characters looked that of the illustrations. If you look at the Tin Man in Return to Oz, he is nothing like the Tin Man that you remember from the Wizard of Oz. They're barely even playing the same sport. um, but I loved the fact that this movie is specifically more telling the story of the books while hinting to the fact that it is a sequel to Judy Garland's Wizard of Oz. I love the design of it. And again, it's got that creep factor to it. And the first real creep factor starts with the whole Dorothy, after returning from Oz, doesn't sleep well. She's always got insomnia. And the weird thing about it is like, and I always kind of chalked this up to that. I guess it's about, your guardian just kind of being worn down a little bit by your issues, like your traumatic issues. Because anybody who's familiar with The Wizard of Oz, Ani M was always very lovable and likable. But at the beginning of The Return of Oz, it's kind of, she kind of sucks. Like, wouldn't go so far as to call it like a bitch, but she's just like, she's less likable because she's more of that stern parent trying to tell Dorothy, which is Feruz's character, of course, to just Oz doesn't exist and stop talking about this fantasy land and you're no good to me, like as in you're no help to me on the farm, and because of the tornado we're struggling, so on and so forth. Um, that's just kind of the first kind of creep sadness to it, and they end up taking her to get like electro kind of like shock therapy kind of stuff, and that's where the creep factor really kind of amps up a little bit, because that's when you learn about the doctor, you learn about the evil nurse, and you learn about kind of the creepy orderly. And just like the Wizard of Oz, those characters are in Oz as well as different characters. Just like the house going up in the tornado, and you see basically the bitch neighbor, who, of course, is the Wicked Witch of the West. And it starts off that way, where you're introduced to these characters who, very similar to Ben Stiller's character in Happy Gilmore, start off nice when there's other people watching, but then when nobody else is around, the real personality of them come out, where they're not nice people and they don't treat Dorothy particularly well. But then, kind of like the Princess of Oz kind of brings her back into Oz to help save them, and that's what kind of opens the door to the story.
Yeah, I mean that's the weird thing about when you like you said when you watch this movie, especially being if you're a huge Wizard of Oz fan and hadn't seen, I mean, either have seen this movie or haven't seen this movie, you kind of gotta like kind of forget about everything you know about the Wizard of Oz as
Yeah.
far as like Judy Garland's character, because you got like I said, you got to realize like Fairuza Balk's character, her Dorothy is very young. She's young like how she was in the books,
Yep.
where obviously Judy Garland's character is 13, 14, or something to the extent like that, where you're doing that even in the movie's based in the time when the movie came out. So even that in that time, it's in Kansas in 1930s, where this even tells you it's in the 1900s because he's talking about the electricity machine that he's gonna do. He's like, "Oh, this is a break new thing. It's the big turn of the 19th century, the 1900s, and this is gonna be," which is which makes sense because that's when the book was made. It was in
Yes.
that very early 1900s when it came out. So that's why, yeah, and you got to realize like I mean, like I said, I mean, there are some other things that they do add into this film. They had to spend I don't know if I've ever found out how much money they had to spend a lot of money to get the ruby slippers into it because that technically was never really part of Wizard of Oz. She was, in the books they were silver,
Hmm.
and obviously because of the technicolor and all that they wanted to do rubies, so the ruby slippers are technically an MGM thing.
Yep.
It's not a Disney thing. It's not that. So they own the rights to that. So anybody who does anything with the Wizard of Oz or anything like that, yeah, that you can do everything with permission from whoever has the rights to Wizard of Oz, except for the ruby slippers. Ruby slippers, you gotta have to get permission from another person. But yeah, it's just so weird, like I said, because you gotta go back and remember, like, okay, yeah, this is a sequel, but you're like, wait, she's so much younger. It's times different. Things are done differently. Obviously different. I mean, you gotta, different characters, different actors, and stuff like that. But I love the fact that yeah, they were just like you said, Annie M is such a lovable character, and even everybody in the her life is like that. I mean, like her, the uncles and everybody else that like Scarecrow and everybody that's part of that dream world of hers. Yeah, but then she was just kind of like how you said, she's just like tired of her, and she's just like, yeah, like you gotta we got a lot of shit we gotta do. We gotta go to this. We gotta go. Take the buggy to this town, and we gotta get a bunch of stuff. We gotta do this. We gotta work on this farm. We gotta get this house fixed up again because you never know when another tornado is gonna come, especially when you're in that area at that
Yeah.
time. So there was like, yeah, but yeah. You go into the hospital. You have the doctor, which is kind of weird, kind of sus. You have the nurse lady that you're kind of like, okay, she's kind of sus. And like you said, I mean, I love how it kind of does that same thing where it brings in a lot of the characters that you see in her normal life, kind of get intertwined into that world of Wizard of Oz. So you're kind of like not even with the original Wizard of Oz, you're not quite really sure whether or not any of that really happened. You know what I mean? It could have just been a figment of her imagination because everybody was kind of part of that world and stuff like that, which continues on with this, and then you're gonna have some of those characters and stuff like that. But then, they add some more crazier characters. About 30 years before all the Kid Cool kids and the 6 7s and all the other stupid shit. There was original TikTok, and TikTok was a cool, not some stupid platform that makes people multi-million dollar deals and shit like that. The original
Right.
TikTok, who was part of the Wizard of Oz's army, and I love his character throughout the whole entire time. So it's pretty sweet.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Because in the original Wizard of Oz, basically she gets to Oz via tornado. This is basically like a rainstorm. She busts out of the asylum kind of a thing. And with the other girl who in real time is like another patient of the hospital, but in Oz time, she's the Princess of Oz. And anyway, she breaks off and they fall in the river and they're getting whisked away while being chased by the crazy nurse lady and whatnot. And then she wakes up, and then Dorothy wakes up in Oz with her like chicken, who's kind of basically like her pet, outside of Toto. There is still Toto, he's still very prominent in this movie. But there's like this secondary chicken character where it's like, a chicken struggling to lay eggs, which is what makes kind of the farm life even that much more difficult and stuff like that. But but yeah, so when it gets into the movie, she wakes up in Oz and that's when she starts like figuring things out and she starts realizing that it's very, very different. The yellow brick road is all bashed up and broken and the Emerald City's all fucked up and everybody's been turned to statues. The Tin Woodsman, the Cowardly Lion, the beautiful people. And she's being stalked out by these rocks because they're basically like the watchers on behalf of like the Gnome King, who's kind of like the new ruler. And she's trying to figure out where the Scarecrow is, who's taken over as like the king of Oz, kind of like breaking off the fact that now that he has a brain and proves to be incredibly intelligent. He knows kind of how to run Oz. But it leads to, her basically searching for her friends. And, TikTok is backing her up and looking out for her. And she just starts kind of like learning about things like as she goes. And there was always this underlying curiosity of like, why do the villains seem to have such a problem with chickens? But she's basically like traveling Oz, very similar Wizard of Oz style, to try to find everybody, discover things. And she, you know, ultimately her first big conflict are the alter egos of the creepy orderly, which is the characters known as the Wheelers. And honestly, they are creepy as fuck. I remember being young and being like, these guys are kind of terrifying, actually. I was always super intrigued by them. I thought their characters were so so cool. They're the equivalent of the flying monkeys of the Wizard of Oz, but I always loved their characters because they were so weird. Like they're the helmets, but with a face on top. So like they could have their head down and there was this creepy face looking at you, and then they had their creepy way of laughing and yelling and all this craziness. There was so much bizarre to these Wheeler characters, but I always love them because they were on such a fucking level of bizarre. But I was always a big fan of that. So anyway, as she's continuing on, and that's where she comes across the different like scenarios. She has the flying couch with the moose head, and the fact that all animals can talk in Oz just like they could before, and trying to piece everything together. And that's when you kind of get into the middle leading towards the main conflict, where the creepy nurse is like a witch character who like has a series of different faces, different heads from victims, because that was like the negotiation she made with the Gnome King, to where she's still technically, beneath him because he's like all powerful. But it's almost kind of like that, it's almost kind of a little bit of like that Elizabeth Bathory feel, like that kind of like the blood of virgins to keep me young kind of a thing. But the fact that she's able to get all these beautiful faces, and she can choose any one that she wants at any given time, and tries to negotiate, and Dorothy is able to escape as she eventually makes her way towards the Gnome King in the great negotiation.
Yeah, I mean that's what I said. The Willers. I mean, those guys were always like the my favorite part of this whole movie. Like you said, they were just so menacing and creepy, and just a cool like I mean, especially at the time. I mean, skateboarding and rollerblading and all that kind of stuff was starting to be kind of cool and things. So it was kind of like this cool combo where you can get these guys to like basically on fours. They're like stilts rollerbladers. It's craziness, weird stuff. But yeah, I love the fact that like you want to talk about all the weird, like M Night Shyamalan kind of like weird plots and things like that. I love the fact that yeah, the chicken the whole entire time when you find out everybody's scared of a chicken, and obviously when we talk about the ending, it's like really like that's the demise of everybody is a fucking chicken and an egg. Like you're
It's
like
kind of
what
lame.
the hell? But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, I love the fact that the like you said the bad girl the witch or princess or queen or whatever, she very Alice in Wonderland queen kind of remind me of her a little bit, especially off with her heads stuff like that. What would the Queen of Hearts is always chopping off heads. What's she doing with those heads? Well, now we found out what she's probably doing with these heads. She's just putting them on display and intertwines them with herself every so often, which I always thought that was creepy. That scene when she's walking around the hallway and doing all with all those different heads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I always thought that was crazy. But yeah, it's so weird. They sprinkle the life dust on the couch with the moose that can talk, and he's like, "Hey, I can fly."
It's so
It's
It's
just
so
so
Rocky and Bullwinkle,
yeah,
dude.
yeah, it's so like out there weird. You're just like, and then like I said, you see all the statues and stuff like that, and then it's like when it gets to the end, when she's, going against the Gnome King, and she's, he's, I always loved the Gnome King because it was like that little mixture of like the clay animation, making the rocks kind of move. Very beginning of it, especially in the one spot where they're opening up the doors. It's all hands. It reminds me of like the labyrinth where like we're helping hands.
Hmm.
It just reminds me of that stuff. And then obviously that they have a guy that plays the Gnome King and stuff like that. And he basically kind of gives them like oh, we'll play a game if you can I'll let you go in and try three chances to figure out what object you think I turned the scarecrow in. I'll let you take them home, but if you miss, if you don't get it in the three counts, then you're gonna be part of my collection forever. And obviously, they go into that, and then she thinks of a good plan, and eventually they figure out. But then that's when you get into the weirdness. That's like, as I say, as creepy and weird as this movie is, it's like when it gets to the ending and everything is kind of good, and she kind of defeats the Gnome King, and everything goes back to normal, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is where it's gonna go back to normal. No, it gets even weirder because I mean, I swear, the Scarecrow, the Lion. The Tin Man, not as much, but the Scarecrow and the Lion are the creepiest things I've ever seen in my entire life. The Scarecrow is like some kind of weird, like, he looks like he came from the book. You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean? It's just like, and then like the lion's like this emancipated, weird, like they spent $5 on the props just to make him because they ran out of money because of all the other money that they spent on the Wheelers and the Gnome King and all that. They're like, yeah, the lion and all them. Hey, we don't need no money for the main guys, the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man. We don't need no money for them. They're not really big part of this movie anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and even the Tin Man looks like very kind of Walmart-ish, but I've never had a problem with that because like he looks exactly like he looked in the book.
Oh
Like
yeah, I mean they
it
definitely look
it's
like they do.
perfect. It's like so proper. But yeah, just like you said, Devil, when it comes to like Dorothy, like she figures it out. She realizes that all the green trinkets are her friends and she starts bringing them back. And then, of course, the Gnome King, who basically had already like told her, be like, yeah, I've got these, I've got the ruby slippers because when you were flying back home, you dropped them and they landed on my head and they made it so easy for me to take over Oz and fuck everything up for you guys. Um, but anyway, he starts losing his mind because he realizes that she's figured it out. And that was the whole deal is that if you can figure it out, you can figure out the riddle, you can figure out who the trinkets are for your friends, you can go free and I'll succeed or whatever. Obviously, that's not how villains work. So he starts trying to get involved and tries to kind of suck everybody down to hell and kind of eat everybody alive. And that was the thing that was so weird with the whole like chicken kind of like, no pun intended, but like scaring the shit out of somebody where, she ends up laying this egg and it, goes into his mouth and he eats it. And eggs are poisonous to gnomes, which is why they don't allow chickens in. And it seemed like such an easy way to win that it was just like so
One egg.
bizarre. It was just one and done. But ultimately, and that's just really what it gets down to, as we make our way into like the obituaries, is the fact that like they kill the Gnome King. Everything's cool. Kind of has a little bit of this never-ending story feel to it with the princess kind of being like that childlike empress type style. And she gets everybody back safely. She rescues everybody. They thought they lost Tintin, but they realized there's this little green metal on the horn of the moose. And, of course, with him being a soldier, it makes sense that that would be what Tintin was turned into. And it just kind of leads them back to her wish of like, I want everything returned to the way it was. Emerald City is brought back. And as punishment for her sins, the witch has been relinquished of all of her powers. And then they, just like the original movie, send her back to her own time. But now everything is good and solid and everything kind of seems right with the world, which was sort of weird because it's like you send her back to her own time, but now she's suddenly no longer struggling. Like her uncle has most of the house like finished, and her relationship with Annie M seems right and rain and solid. And I don't know, it was a little weird. Like I've always loved this movie. I still love it to this day, and I will watch it again. I'll watch it many times again. But it's got a series of holes to it that are just kind of bizarre to it. But anyway, nothing that's worth just destroying something that's a really fun, solid movie and a movie that I enjoy. And while my heart gives it high marks because it's always meant a lot to me growing up, you know, realistically, like I give the movie a solid 7. For stylistic situations and stylistic executions, I could go a little bit lower, but I like the story. I like the way it's portrayed. I think Feruza does a great job at a young age with a role like that. And while it's a higher ranked movie in my heart, like you and I have discussed, when it comes to how movies are and where we like to rank things when it comes to a real high quality movie, I have to keep a certain amount of realism in my ratings for keeping in mind how a movie's aged. So while I do consider it an upper echelon movie just because of my life, I have to keep it a quality movie for the common populace. So I like it as a seven.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you too. I mean, for me, it's like it's one of those ones where, like, yeah, theoretically, like, stylistically, visually, because, like I said, how old it is, the craziness, the kookiness of it, the weirdness of it, people watching it now that maybe haven't seen it then, it definitely didn't age very well and things like that. Yeah, I mean, you could definitely shit on it and give it a way lower score. But I mean, like I said, I mean, it's just that nostalgic feeling, you know what I mean? It was such a cool movie. It was one of those ones that like a lot of people like still don't even know really about, especially
Yeah.
even people who are, who may have been, in the 80s or in the 90s and stuff like that may not have never seen this or heard of it. Because, like I said, it wasn't like, you got to realize this was, 50 plus years after the original one was made, and it didn't, it wasn't like a blockbuster huge movie where it was like everybody and their mother knew about it and stuff like that. So, what I mean? It's more of like one of those people like, hey, did you know that they made a sequel to Wizard of Oz? And you're like, what? And you're like, yeah, check it out. They're like, The Wiz? I mean,
Oh God, let's not go there. Fuck that movie.
it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like, nah, it's not quite not quite that one, but anyway. But yeah, so like I said, so for me, like, yeah, I mean, I would probably like in general probably give it like a 6 or a 6.5. I said, but I think just because the fact that it's such a great movie, it is the first movie that we got to see Fairuza Balk. I know she was in a TV show for like one episode before this, and she
Yeah,
did
it
some
was called like the greatest Christmas pageant.
yeah, commercials and stuff like that. But this is her first actual movie, and she's a leading person. So, you know what I mean. So I think it's just a great job and just that longevity of her career. Like I said, the three movies that she's done, which shortly after this she did The Worst Witch, which I've already appointed my opinion on how much I loathe that film. But anyway, and then obviously
Love the cast.
then everybody yeah then obviously everybody knows her as as in The Craft.
Yeah,
So obviously, so I mean there's been 9 million other movies that she's done. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of her. Like I love The Water Boy, American History X. I just got done watching that Paradise City where you were talking about the continuation of American Satan. So I've always really liked her. I've liked her career and stuff like that. So it's just cool to go back and see like some of these big actors that you kind of like, and see them in their first movies and stuff like that, and see how good, especially when they were such a young actors. So
yeah,
yeah, like I said, to me, yeah, I could probably give it, a 6 or a 6.5 in general, but I'm like, I'll go with a 7 just because of the fact that it's such a cool, nostalgic, and just a weird movie that like you said, has a lot of weird plot holes, a lot of things wrong with it, but it works still. It's still an entertaining film. And, the whole time I'm watching it, I wasn't like, gotta watch this just to watch it. I still enjoy watching it. So yeah, I definitely still give it a 7.0.
absolutely. So that's the way it's going to be. Fangs and Infernos for Return to Oz. Myself and Devil are going to go with a 7.0 on the obituaries for it. But Devil, we got to transition right into your movie, man. So let's get wicked. Start us off, man. Something wicked this way comes. Pam Grier. There's ties in with, of course, just like you were saying, with Ray Bradbury, but even a little bit of Stephen King. It's a very, very unique pick, man. And I definitely saw pretty quickly why you like this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, like I said, I mean, when it comes to Disney, like I said, that my favorite two films of all time. This is my favorite live action Disney film, and then people will be like, "Oh, what's your favorite animated?" And when people find out that it's Dumbo, they look at me like, "What? That's the weirdest thing ever." Which is
Black
kind of weird
Cauldron.
too, being the fact it's so hardcore. And like I said, it's like Wizard of Oz too. It's such a movie that came out 70, 60 years before, I was even thought of. It's such an old film that you would think that it would be more of the late 70s, early 80s, maybe early 90s Disney films that would be my favorite animated. And like I said, I do enjoy those. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've always been a Dumbo fan, but I've always been a Something Wicked This Way Comes. It's to me, it's just a perfect movie. Like I said, I've always loved the storyline. You know, we've obviously, with Ray Bradbury, I've always loved all his books and things like that. I've always loved the concept of these just people coming from the dirt and just coming around. I mean, even our good Wednesday 13 has done something wicked this way comes where
Yeah.
he has got a line, where do you come from, the dust, where do you go to, the grave, which is basically a line from the movie. And like I said, I always just thought this was a cool movie. I always loved the concept, these two young boys, the one boy doesn't have a father because he's off wherever, and the other one has an older father who's like in his golden ages and really can't do anything for him. So these kids are just kind of just roaming around doing, fun things and just hanging out. And, all of a sudden, a guy, Mr. Hand, comes around and starts telling everybody, throwing. I mean, I just love the fact that, like, if this movie was remade, which we'll talk about that later on, but if it was made now, that the PC world would hate Mr. Hand even in the very beginning because he's just walking around littering the whole
Yeah.
entire time, throwing the papers that are just blowing around in the wind and shit like that. People would be like, "Hey, man, like you're not supposed to litter. You're killing the earth already." But I love the fact that he just did just bring that. And like I said, it's just a cool, dark, atmospheric film. I've always really, really loved it. Like I said, I love the Mr. Hand character. I love Pam Greer's character in this film. It was just one of those ones that, like, even when you were watching, even watching it now, it's just still got that really cool, dark, like I said, it's very, like you said, like very Stephen King, very Tim Burton kind of s before Tim Burton. That just that dark kind of gothic tale about, and basically the premise or the ultimate thing is basically a kind of like greed, or like, or
Yeah.
wanting stuff too much. What do you want? Like, even in the very beginning of the movie when you find out the characters, you have the guy who lost his arm and his leg. He's always talking about how he was a great football player and he wishes that he had his arm and his leg.
Yeah. The
You have
bartender.
the bartender. You have the teacher who was really old, but in her youth she was super beautiful, wanting to go, wanting to be beautiful again. You have the guy who, the barber and stuff like that, talking about wanting to meet exotic women and all this kind of stuff, and just kind of wanting to get out in this world. I love the fact that those play into it, and even like I said, even the boys, you know what I mean. You got the one that doesn't do it. You have the young boy that's got the older father and stuff like that. So it's all about, like, you know trying to make yourself better and wanting things. But then again, it's like, do you really need that stuff? Or is it stuff that you just want because of your own greed or your own pride or your own sense of, like, worth, not, in the stuff that you realize that you really have in your life is what's actually precious and not what you really need.
Yeah, there's a very Seven Deadly Sins vibe about this movie without being like, about the seven deadly sins. And that was something I always thought was like really cool about this movie. It just had a really just kind of interesting design. I like the fact that Ray Bradbury had his, like, literally had like his like death grip on the movie. Like he had creative control, which is very, very difficult for certain authors and stuff like that. Like even Stephen King, who you know, you had mentioned in our notes, like actually like had put together a script for this that was actually rejected, which is a crazy thing to think about, that somebody wouldn't want something from Stephen King. But also, this movie's 1983. Like the bubble hadn't quite popped yet when it came for Stephen King. Um, but it was just that's still just kind of a crazy concept. But the fact that, like, Ray stayed, he's like, I have to be involved in this or you don't get it. And that was the thing that I thought was really, really cool about this movie. But yeah, I like the overall design of that movie. Like it stays pretty dark and dank, but like it has its splotches of like sunlight to kind of like lighten the mood or let you know about certain things, or also kind of like remind you a little bit like about what's kind of important. And that was the thing I also really liked about this is it was a overall very dark, be careful what you wish for mixed with like what's hiding around corners. At least that's something that I always got from this movie. But it had that silver lining of like just love and protection. And that was something I always thought was really cool about this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I love the fact that like the characters, you've got the Lightning Man, which is basically like you're like you're all gonna die, Friday the 13th kind of like doom and gloom kind of character in this, and then like you said, the Mr. Hand character in this movie is I just love. I love freaking just the way his character was,
Yeah.
and like, it's so cool. I remember, like, the whole like adding into the carnival. Obviously, that's what's going to drive people into it, especially drive the kids into it. I mean, and who doesn't like a merry-go-round that may or may not kill you. I think it's the coolest like concept where this merry-go-round, if you go forward, it ages you, and if you go backwards, it makes you younger. And I love the fact that they even make the one guy, the big, huge, burly, redheaded guy, turn him into like a younger version, and it's like the lady's like nephew. It's like, oh, my nephew came, and like, yeah, yeah, no, that's not your nephew, lady. That was a guy who was like 40 just a minute ago, but. I always love that. I mean, and even
Yes.
and like I said, I always love the fact that like them going after him and stuff like that. Even to now, to this day, even watching it, and I'm pretty sure I'm not 100% sure whether or not Miss Vamp watched this movie with you, but I know if she did watch it with you, she didn't like the scene just as much as I didn't like the scene. The spider scene in this movie is still the creepiest thing in the entire world. Those were real spiders that they used, real tarantulas throughout most of them. Not all of them were, but most of them really were. And that scene just still like even creeps me out now. I remember watching it and then like just feeling like I had freaking creepy crawlies all over me the whole entire time. But yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that. Like I said, Pam Grier's character in this whole entire time, she's like enticing these people, and she's kind of like you don't know what she really is. Is she like is she like a fortune teller? Is she sort of like a witch? Is she like a ghost? Or she, you kind of see little shards of her face, like in the lightning and stuff like that, but you can't really tell exactly, what she is. But yeah, I just love the fact that it's such an evil movie. I mean, when it comes to it, like I said, I mean, granted, yes, I mean it's in the long run of it, it's definitely it would have been interesting to see Stephen King do it, but I think it would have been a different setting just because this is more of like a kids horror movie, scary movie, to an extent where like it was not really meant to be horrifically over the top, like bloody or scary, which Stephen King would have. It'd have been cool, and yeah, I mean, as a kid. I personally still would have watched it because yeah, like I said, like we said earlier, when it came to like people watching, either watching this movie or watching Return to Oz, they were like, "Oh, I'm so scared." But I was watching like Texas
Yeah.
Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween and seeing The Fly in the theaters, and I grew up with the more extreme, scarier movies as a kid. So for me, like I said, not that there weren't scenes in either one of those movies that creeped me out. Like I said, the spider scene definitely creeped me out. But I mean, I was like, just the whole concept of like this guy that can just the Mr. Hand character, even whenever he's just like doing the thing with his hands and he's doing this and he's just like showing you one thing and then kind of crushing him, and he even the scene where he's talking to the dad like, hey man, let me get these kids, and he's throwing away pages of the book and he's just like flipping in there like this cool special effect of like him basically taking a year of his life away
Yeah.
from him and stuff like that, you know what I mean? It's definitely, like I said, there's a lot of that into it too. A lot of the regrets and stuff like that, because the dad, being older, and yeah, at one point he was talking about how like he wasn't able to save his son from drowning because he was just too old to get to him at a certain time, that somebody else had to save his own son's life, and that's kind of what his regret is. The fact that he had a kid at such a at such an older age and stuff like that, being able to like run around with these kids. But yeah, it's such a crazy, interesting movie. I mean, like I said, I mean, when it comes to especially when it comes to a world of like we were talking about with remakes and stuff like that, I've always really kind of wanted a remake of this film. I always thought that like a newer version of this film would be good, but it really would have to be done by somebody that I would appreciate to do it. I think somebody that would take it because it's in like you said, like we're huge fans of the book and stuff like that. And you talked about the witches. I mean, I'm not gonna say too much bad about the the remake witches. We both watched it. It
Mhm.
was good. I liked it. I love the fact that they did play to the book a little bit more
Yeah.
versus the original witches, but it still just didn't have that spark and that thing, which is crazy because you would think that with technology now and not even necessarily CGI, but even just technology with doing prosthetics and doing that, you could go that route. But it just there's something that doesn't beat that old timey kind of
Yeah.
stuff to that.
It was strangely flat in comparison to the old
Yeah,
school witches. It was definitely weird.
yeah,
But yeah, no, definitely Devil. Because the other thing too, like similar to the Return to Oz, as we wrap this up and move into the obituaries for final scores, is like even the demise of Mr. Dark, it had a little bit of that same Return to Oz camp to it, where it's like, wait, he gets a little bit of like electroshock, and now he's aging and decaying and just kind of boop, dissolving away. There's a little bit of me that kind of was like, kind of wanted more. Almost kind of like in Idle Hands when we discussed that with like,
yeah.
the death of the hand and Seth Green being like, what, no giant portal to hell, no screeching, no terror, just
Yeah.
sorry, that's
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of,
I mean, I
but
agree with it a little bit, but I
it's
think
the
with
sign of the times, and
yeah, but I think with this movie, it kind of makes a little bit more sense than than the Return of Oz, just
yeah,
because of the fact that throughout the whole entire movie they're talking about lightning and lightning being like a they're even going after that guy and trying to find out when the storm is coming, when the lightning's coming, because lightning is their Achilles heel.
yeah,
It shows their true selves. And so I mean, like I said, I mean, yeah, it is kind of hokey. It's like, okay, like you're afraid of a little bit of lightning, but then again, like I said, I mean, it's
1983.
you got like even with your brethren's, vampires and stuff like that. It's like you have ways to dismize you. Yeah, it's like yeah, it's kind of cheesy, but all I gotta do is just open up a curtain at the right time and
Facts.
boom. So it's like
No, 100%. And it's also funny, Devil, because honestly, I would love if there was a remake too. There's a small part of me that would love to get whoever wanted to tackle this movie in touch with our friend O'Braki, because there's something about his ringmaster character from Shriek Show that I feel would excel in this movie if they did a modernized version of that. But
yeah.
that's a conversation for another time. But we'll definitely would love to get Chris's opinion on that, maybe in a future conversation. But how do you look at the scoring for this? We've got Return to Oz at a 7.0, and we're putting it up against Something Wicked This Way Comes. Devil, how do you look at your personal score when it comes to this movie?
I mean, for me personally, like, it's gonna be like the same way when we did Return to Oz. You know what I mean? Like in except for maybe the the reverse side. Like with that, where it's like okay, the movie might be a 5 or a 6 or so. We're gonna bump it up from nostalgia. Theoretically, yes, I would probably like to put this movie up there in that like 10 to 9 range just because of how much I love this film. And like I said, it being my favorite Disney live action film still to this day. I mean, this movie came out in 1982 or 1983, so you're looking at like, 40 some years later, it's still my favorite, live action film. And it's still a movie that I'll watch constant and all the time. It's still just a fun movie that I love watching. So, like I said, theoretically in my heart, yeah, I'd love to give it that same kind of score, like a Rocky Horror Picture Show or something like that, where I'm gonna give it like. But I mean, ultimately, you watch it, it definitely does time itself. That's why I said I kind of wish for maybe a more of a remodern version take of it, because like I said, I'm a huge fan of Ray Bradbury, and I love like Fahrenheit 451, and I love that old school movie. But then they brought back a newer one and came out a couple years ago with like Michael B. Jordan, I think, and Michael Shannon, and all them are in it. And I really loved it. I thought it was a cool version of a book that I've always loved. I always loved Fahrenheit 451. I think it's a cool concept of people like basically burning books and stuff like that. So I think like something Wicked This Way Come has that style of writing that you could make it more modern and it still would play very well. But like I said, I definitely wouldn't want just any average Joe director doing it. I would definitely want somebody to that I love. So like I said, in the long run, yeah, I love to give it high, to a 10 to a 9. But like I said, I mean, it still definitely has its flaws. It's definitely still in the 80s. It still has that camp factor. I mean, it still's got a little bit of stuff that is a little bit more wow now, like when you look at it for the time period of like how they were able to do some of those effects with not having CGI or any of that kind of stuff. It's all just lighting and visual effects and and just doing a lot of weird, crazy stuff and stuff like that to it. So I always like the like that. So for me, I mean, I'm probably gonna, like I said, I'm gonna down it a little bit because it hurts my heart to. But I'm gonna give it an 8.
No problem, man. Absolutely. No, I definitely like this movie quite a bit. I really do. Again, you connect with it more than I do. For me, it matches Return to Oz stylistically. It works for me. I enjoy it. I can watch it more than once. I'm happy to have it in the collection. I mean, everything is solid. I like it on an even plane out of 7 as well. Ultimately, it's going to be a victory for the devil in this one because overall, that still is proper. The overall design, execution, and stylistic appeal of something this Wicked This Way Comes ultimately is stronger and it ages better in that movie than Return to Oz does. Again, I like them evenly that way. Like you said, in my heart of hearts, I have Return of Oz as a better overall movie and enjoyment for me than Wicked. But again, that's my grow bringing my upbringing, there we go, my upbringing with that movie being so prominently in my life, and then something Wicked This Way comes coming later in my life. Now that being said, watching them side by side where I can watch them, judge them, critique them, and I use the word judge in the most like respectful way, but I just mean just judge them and critique them properly. There's just a better aging process, a more simplistic, straightforward story in something this Wicked This Way Comes that works to its strengths. Where also off of books, Return to Oz, you really have to kind of be down for the roller coaster ride that movie's going to give you because there's just a lot of places it has to go in order to tell that story. So I like the movie Something This Wicked This Way Comes on an evil plane you know, with Return to Oz. But ultimately, if you feel confident in us meeting with the middle, that's still a 7.5 overall and a victory for you when it comes to this. What do you think of that, my friend?
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Like I said, even if like we would have scored it evenly, I think like if you say like you said, even if we would have been 7-7, I
Yeah.
think like you said, I think the edge would have just been like I said, even though we're both gonna put our ploy for of like why we would want one, but you were saying like that even in your words that you thought that something wicked works a little bit better now visually and like how it is now. It holds up a lot better of a film than versus Return to Oz. Return to Oz, it's like I said, not that we still love that. We still love the movie and stuff like that. But I think I think like I said, I think that when you see it, it's not something wicked is more of like a full like functionally film where like Return to Oz is more laughable now. Not that we're laughing at it, but it's got more. It at the time it wasn't. It was still campy, but when we were younger and we watched it, we really
Yeah.
didn't think of it as that. Where yeah, something wicked has a little bit of camp in it, but it's not to to the extent of Return to Oz. So yeah, I definitely agree. I think just giving that little bit of an edge to something wicked with the just the production kind of value of it. Plus you got to realize, like I said, both of them are from books, but you know, something Wicked's more of an original idea, where Return to Oz is more of like a continuation of that. I think a lot of people probably, like I said, but it's weird though because it's one of those ones, like we said earlier, a lot of people may not have not even known that that was a sequel to Return of, to Wizard of
Yeah,
Oz. So it's
for
crazy.
sure. Especially when you realize that Dorothy is 9, and it's like
Yeah,
she totally wasn't 9 when
yeah.
she was like
She got
splashing
younger in the
water on the
sequel.
witch. How does that happen? But also, that is the way, and forever it shall stand. So that's the way it's going to be, Fangs and Infernos. When it comes to Disney horror, as the devil and I have christened it and made those decisions and chosen those movies, we are going to give victory to the devil on this one. When it comes to something wicked this way comes at a 7.5, takes out Return to Oz at a 7.0. We love Fairuza Balk. We love The Wizard of Oz, but Ray Bradbury, the consistency of that movie and the overall storytelling as a standalone novel definitely gives it strength and the edge, and that's the way it's going to be as Devil takes this one home. We appreciate you guys as always, Fangs Infernos. You guys are awesome. You're always so supportive, and we really appreciate that you guys love what myself and Devil do. But on that note, keep in mind that if you want to be fashionably, stylistically awesome in your beloved attire, support our friends Mark and Lizzie with Rock and Horror Apparel. That's where all of our merch comes from, is from their website, rockandhorror.com, with Rock and Horror Apparel. We really appreciate everything that they do for us. Coming out of the spooky season as of the recording of this episode, keep in mind you can always get Spooky 365, and that's where our friends in Twisted Vines come with all of the amazing things that they do, the stuff they make. They all do it by hand, and it's fantastic. From Ouija boards to home decor, it's the absolute way. And keep in mind, if you like things when it comes to dinner, as well as relaxing with your loved ones, we've got Brutalities for something really, really nice to enjoy and sip on. And we've got our friends at Coney Island Saucery with everything that they do with an amazing series of spices. And of course, please, please, please support independent, amazing museums like our buddy John, who owns and operates the Salem Witchboard Museum and the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. But that's the way it's going to be. That is, like I said, forever how it shall stand. As we circle it back around to a devilish victory. Again, something wicked this way comes, takes out Return to Oz. We appreciate you guys. See you soon. Horns up. Fangs out. Devil, my friend, I think it's time that we spill the tea. Brutalities. Vampire and Devil Podcast couldn't be more excited, more humbled to let you all know that we have partnered with very dear friends of ours for a long time in Brutalities. And there's so much great stuff, so many flavors, so much to enjoy, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about it. Isn't that right there, my friend?
Oh yeah, we like it hot. Of course the Inferno likes it hot. Do you like the hot tea? Well, you might as well get some Brutality. Yeah, horror movies, puns, rock and roll, Brutality's got it all.
Absolutely. When it comes to the vampire, you know that he's going to absolutely gravitate towards that Nosferatu or that Nosferatu brew. Absolutely a favorite of mine. And we got to show a little bit love to, by all means, the biggest franchise in horror right now. That would be Terrifier. So Brutalities has brought you Terrifier. But that's just from the vampire. The devil has some favorites of his own.
Oh yeah, do you like the movie Pumpkinhead? Well, how about a little pumpkin bread for your throat holes? And like I said, with the rock and roll fans and the horror fans, Wednesday 13 fans, do you like Wednesday 13 and tea? How about a couple of those? With the Summertime Suicide and a couple other ones too. So if you like Wednesday 13 and you like the tea and you like the Brutalities, go to the website.
Absolutely. And so, of course, we like to look out for those that look out for us. We love you, Fangs. We love you, Infernos. But as a courtesy from Brutalities to be bestowed on you, we have that Vampire and Devil coupon code, don't we, my friend?
Oh yeah, you want to save a little dough, little cheddar, maybe buy some more shit? Go on the line, Brutalities, type in Vampire and Devil, and you get 10% off your order. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. So it's getting into the chilly weather. People need to warm their bones. They need to warm what little skin they may or may not have. But Brutalities is the way to get it done. So that's the way it's going to be because Vampire and Devil said so. Horns up, fangs out for Brutalities. All right there, Fangs and Infernos. Let's discuss another coffin nail, shall we? We're going to go back just a touch to 2024. We're going to talk about Vampire Lake.
A lot of plot holes, a lot of subpar acting. The story has at least a little bit of charm to it. So the thing about it is it's college kids, they go to this getaway at the lake. And the fact of the matter is one of the girls who's obsessed with vampire culture, has always heard about a vampire that inhabits the lake. And she wants this trip to be the opportunity for her to resurrect it and get turned herself because she's obsessed with being one as well. It's got that kind of typical like attempt at being spooky intro with a car that breaks down, girls walking, trying to get a ride, and then, being chased by somebody that she thinks is just another bystander. As she runs away, she's attacked and killed off screen with a loud scream. Just kind of what it is, typical, traditional, nothing over the top. And then the story itself is just kind of like that typical college story. There's really nothing particularly that great about it. It just kind of is what it is, drinking, talking about, life and school and lack of boyfriends and wanting boyfriends and all that kind of thing. I mean, there's nothing really like over the top about it, but it doesn't have a particularly long running time. It's only about an hour and 10 minutes, and it just kind of is its thing. The vampire that's used as the villain in this movie is unique enough. He's always just kind of around, but you don't really realize it right away. You don't realize at first that he's kind of a hitchhiker at the beginning of the movie, and then they kind of set it up to where there's almost this kind of awkward ultimate Hulk ending to the end of the movie with a similar hitchhiker or the same hitchhiker. I'll let you decide. But there is also a little bit of like comedic charm to this, where the girl who like tries to save her family, tries to talk the vampire into turning her, which he does, only for him to strap her to a chair and leave her out in the sunlight to die, which honestly I actually kind of loved. I actually thought that was hilarious, and I thought it was actually kind of a fun little twist to put into a movie that's clearly just kind of a very basic, low budget, almost kind of college student film project style. So it just kind of is what it is. But that's the way it's going to be. I can't go over the top with this. It's cute, it's kooky, but it's not something that I feel overly obligated to see again. So 4.5 is all I'm going to give Vampire Lake from 2024.
Ghouls and Fangs, Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a three-headed monster per se, when it comes to Baltimore, that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe, we've got John Waters, but what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and Vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history, he's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And we love it. We love the fact that, they were gonna bring in this museum here in Baltimore, so all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans or maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you gotta check it out, because the devil and the vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddities shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, fangs out.